ladies and gentlemen. A little bit calmer than some of the shows I do, but nevertheless, one of the most entertaining. That's right, Mother Fluffers. It's Armwrestling Old School. And I'd like to welcome back the two resident co-hosts for this show, Mr. Bob Brown in the Mother Fluffing House, and also the font of all historical arm wrestling knowledge, Eric Roussin. There he is, in the freezing cold of Canada. So we got Bob coming from Mesquite, Nevada, where it's about 60-odd degrees. Lovely climate over there. And you've got Eric, who probably freezes to death if he goes outside. And where I am, actually, funnily enough, we've had a lot of snow over here. Not Canada level, that's for damn sure. But I was just saying to Bob there, as Eric went and sorted out his lighting, that this is going to be a refreshing change from talking to Devon Larratt about the nuances of the King's move. None of that rubbish on here, ladies and gents. This is all about old school arm wrestling, all about the raw and the real of the 1980s in the game of iron arms. And Eric, we're getting up to that special era that everybody knows is the one. It's the over-the-top era, mate. This is the one, isn't it? This is where it all... This was like the embryo.
Yeah, this was an explosion over the top, absolutely. So as most of the people viewing this video know, Sylvester Stallone movie Over the Top, 1987. And for those who don't know, a lot of the arm wrestling footage from that movie is actual arm wrestling footage from the Over the Top World Championship. That was filmed in July 1986. And to lead up to that event, the studio agreed to pay for a series of qualifiers. Initially, it was all around the U.S. Mm-hmm. So in the second half of 1985, Laurie Cole, Marvin Cohn, a few others traveled to a dozen cities or so, organizing these qualifiers. The qualifiers had good money. The finals had really good money. But the exciting part was the top four in every class would qualify for the Vegas, and the first place would even get their flight paid to go to Vegas. So understandably, these events had huge turnouts. The qualifiers themselves had 250 entries for a right arm only contest. So the classes were big, 40, 50 people on average. And they had, go ahead.
Three.
Pardon?
3 in the UK. I think we had 3 classes in the UK, if I recall rightly. Light, middle, and heavy. They
had more than that for the qualifiers in North America, that I know. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They had 5 classes. They had this, and then they also had the truckers division, which initially had the same classes. And then there were also a military division. Now, the military division didn't have cash prizes, and I really don't have very much information on the turnout for those events. But those were the 3 divisions. So it was going so well that Laurie Cole, she was in the elevator with the head of the studio, Canon Films, one day around December, and he asked how it was going, and she goes, "It's been great, going great." And he's like, "Well, why don't you go internationally?" So the first half of '86, they traveled the world. They went to Canada, Israel, Holland, Germany, France, England, Japan, and that was the big shot in the arm for the sport, because some of those places had never seen organized arm wrestling yet. And once again, the top 4 in every class would qualify, leading up to the finals. The finals had, I've heard 700 or 800 arm wrestlers at that event. And it's just right hand. The classes were absolutely huge. Some of them had 80, 90 people per class. And it was really, it's not about who's there, it's who's not there. All of the top people of that era, 99% were at that event. And they were excited to be part of it. A, to win the money, B, to be part of this whole movie thing. And the winners of each class were given cameos in the film. So they had a lot of excitement going for that event.
I think one thing we need to really get into as we walk through this as well is those distinctions between the truckers division and so on, because many times when you're discussing this, that can be quite confusing. I mean, I was at that event, and I think I was 13 years old. 1987, wasn't it, the finals? When I went over, my dad...
86.
86, so I was 12 years old, Eric. Went over with my dad, he took us out, boxing match over there. We did a big boxing match in Vegas. First time I'd ever been to the US, actually.
Okay.
Awesome experience, but no idea really what was going on because arm wrestling was brand new to us at that period of time. We'd been involved in the qualifiers over here and so on, and my dad was into the boxing. Just made a lot of sense for us to do that, and it was a great time. Apart from the tournament itself was, I want to say, quite badly organised, really, because it went on forever. I mean,
I think 18 hours, yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You could go away, go out, do stuff, come back, still running, go out, do stuff, come back, still running. And it went on to the early hours of the morning. Obviously, I didn't see those, I didn't see the finals and so on, but yeah, crazy.
They were intermingling the running of the tournament with the shooting of the film.
Right.
And if you've ever been to a production, like a full-blown production, I mean, it's literally stop everything, take 30 minutes to set up a shot, do the shot. Oh, wait, we didn't get it right. Take another 30 minutes to set up a shot. Next thing you know, you've been on break for an hour, and they start tournament up again, and it keeps happening.
Yeah.
It just keeps happening. So that's why it took so long.
And each one of those shots, I'm sure they did God knows how many takes till they were happy with it, So it's just not the best, set of circumstances for holding it. Can you imagine that with the modern arm wrestling crowd, man?
It was the whole crowd, but for arm wrestlers, and I have no doubt, like I've talked to John Brzenk about this, and it was a pain in the butt. They were there till 7 the next morning, right?
Not when it actually finished, 7.
Yeah. But it was, $10,000 for first place in the regular divisions, $100,000 truck in the truckers division.
In 1986.
Yeah, they're going to stick around for that kind of money in 1986.
Yeah, 1986 professional soccer players in the UK weren't on mega, you know what I mean? We're talking about a different time frame. Now your top players will be on hundreds of thousands of pounds a week. Back then, maybe £2,000 a week, nothing like the same. So that perspective is important to register as well. It's really good that we clock that. But the division splits were really important, weren't they, Eric? Because one of them was prize money, one wasn't, and so on. Or the truck was where the truck was, excuse me.
So the truckers division, a lot of people say, well, was John Brzenk a trucker? He wasn't a trucker. He was a trucker/Teamsters union member. So he, working for the airline, he was a member of a union that qualified him. So he wasn't a trucker, but so it wasn't exclusively truckers in the truckers division. If you were a member of a union.
Speaking of John, when we were in Poland, I was rooming with him in Poland, and I'm pretty sure he told me he got a lot of stick for that as well. He was getting quite a bit of abuse from people saying, you shouldn't be in this class, and the usual politics stuff, because everybody knows who's the man, and he was up there. But, I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it? It's like anything else. If there's rules there to be bent, people are going to try and bend them when there's big money involved.
Exactly.
The money, so the money, as Bob was saying, is $10,000 for first place in the super heavyweight pro, $2,000, $1,000 for second and third, or I think $2,000 for second, and then prizes for third and fourth. The other classes, it was $5,000 first place. So the real big money in the pro was in the super heavyweights, and obviously the winner of the unlimited truckers division won the truck. So that was the distinction between those divisions. And you're right, it was extremely busy. They were running 8 tables throughout the day amid all these interruptions. So can you imagine the chaos of calling out names and the referees and all of that? It must have been crazy.
Oh my God. Now, the other thing is I really want to dig into, if you've got this information, Eric, was around, I know when I learned a great deal about this when we had Richard on, Richard Lucas, because he was saying, the way that the tournament panned out, he had a very rough draw, and also a lot of the big guns that were in there, the guys that ended up in the finals and so on, and I'm not going to steal the thunder from that story, but had already been involved in very big matches prior to pulling John in the final and so on, obviously countered by the fact that John was a bloody middleweight.
Right.
You know, let's be honest. I mean, Bob, what did John actually weigh at that time? What, 85, 90 kilos top end, really?
I would say top end. I would say top end. I did not personally know John back then. I think the very first time I ever saw John was in Atlanta in like 1989, and he pulled the 220 division. However, I know he only weighed probably 200 when he did it. He didn't diet or anything. And then when I moved to Utah in 1993, he walked around every day of his life at about 200 to 205. So I would agree that he was definitely less than 90 kilos, probably more like 87 kilos during that time, eating anything he wanted.
And you had guys arm wrestling in the heavyweight division there who were true monsters. Cleve Dean, Scott Norton, Richard himself, you know, all much, much bigger than John. So how much detail have you got on the sort of progression through the classes and who faced who and who was in what class and that kind of thing, Eric? Have you got a lot of the info on that?
I know who was in what class, but from the truckers division itself, I also saw the interview you're talking about with Richard, and I was not aware of that. So I know Richard had a war with Ed Arnold.
Yes.
And I don't remember the consequences exactly, but
and didn't he have two? Didn't he beat him once and lose once?
It's possible. Maybe Ed lost. I think Ed lost to. I can't remember who lost to who actually.
I think Richard said that he beat Ed Arnold the first time.
Okay.
And then ended up in another battle.
Right.
And then and then came straight back on almost and had to pull Ed again and lost.
Okay.
And it was Ed Arnold that made it to the finals, right? Against John?
Yes.
Okay, so now think about that. If it went down that way, then Richard pulled Ed Arnold. They had a war. Richard won. Then Richard must have faced John.
I think they did, Bob. I think Richard beat him pretty quickly the first time.
Okay.
And then pulled another battle, and then came back and lost a war to Ed. So I think I need to check that back, but I'm pretty sure at the time, because at the time I remember thinking, my God. So Richard beat Ed Arnold comfortably the first time. How strong was Richard Lupkis then?
Amazingly strong, right? But, so we have to assume then John's the one that put Richard into the loser's bracket.
Right.
No, I don't think they pulled.
Well, then how did Richard get into the loser's bracket?
Look, I believe that he lost another battle with someone else like a Scott Norton or someone like that. I need to check back on that, but I recall at the time, although I don't recall the exact details, that I was very shocked when I heard the result because I was sort of doing the mental maths in my mind. And I said, so you actually beat the guy that ended up in the final in a battle with John relatively comfortably earlier in the day. And he said, in typical understated Richard fashion, yes.
Right.
And I was like, wow.
So if you think about how wars play out without seeing the bracket, theoretically it's possible John was not the best arm wrestler that day and just got a good draw.
But it was a middleweight.
Oh, no, I understand that. No, I understand.
So that's the thing. It's sort of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but Richard wasn't in the truckers division, was he? Just double check that.
No. Richard, Ed, and John were in the truckers. Scott and Cleve were in the pro.
Scott and Cleve were in the pros, right? Yeah. So it can't have been Scott and Cleve he faced, and I will check this out with Rich to get the absolute story correct. So if you want to carry on it, Eric, and let us know what you're aware of and what detail we've got on that specifically, because it's fascinating how that worked out.
Yeah, so unfortunately for the truckers division, I don't know much more than what we just discussed. I would encourage anyone who's never seen the final match between John and Ed. It's on YouTube somewhere. It's incredible. It's
awesome atmosphere, isn't it? You can feel it.
And John transitions into so many different moves and techniques, and he finally puts him away. But it wasn't an easy match. It was a good final.
And considering if Neil is remembering correctly, that Ed Arnold had a war before pulling John.
Right.
So imagine if Ed Arnold was fresh as a daisy pulling
Right.
John. You might have still had the same outcome because John took Ed Arnold's hand.
Right.
And the second you take a man's hand, they lose 30% of their power. So you might have had the exact same match. I'm just saying it'd be interesting to know.
Yeah, so, I mean, the outcomes of the matches are always going to be conjecture. They are what they are, as they are in any tournament, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But, like I say, the sort of advantage pendulum evened itself out because John was so light. What did Ed Arnold weigh at that time, Eric, do you know? How big was he?
He was never a huge guy. He may have been 230. He was not a monster.
I was going to guess at under 250, but I thought, you know, whereas Richard, giant, big man, you know.
Yeah, I don't know how big Richard was, but I think he was getting close to 300 by that time.
Now, the other thing I wanted to really get into here is because of the scale of Over the Top, and I know that one of the things that shocked me when I spoke to John about this, as I say, I think the first time was in Poland, and we were just having an ice cream and chatting it through, and he was telling me stuff about it, and he told me, I can't remember exactly how many matches, but it was like not that many matches that he pulled, like 8, not many.
There were fewer entrants in the truckers division than in the pro division.
Mm-hmm.
That I know. I don't have the exact numbers, but whereas some of the pro classes had 80, 90 guys, I think the truckers divisions had more like 15, 20, something like that.
And how much detail have you got, or has it been possible to piece together for the archive in terms of exactly who was in what classmate? So in what I'm getting at there is how many monster names we had. Because everybody does that thing, don't they, when they're watching Over the Top and they're trying to clock a guy, trying to spot who's in there, you know. And it'd be nice to know who were the guys that were in there, the big name arm wrestlers of the time, and any that have survived through to today that were involved and pulled over the top, because that would give us sort of an indication of what kind of depth of talent was there. I remember I pulled a guy in Virginia Beach at the World Championships. I actually beat him to get through to the final before getting my ass handed to me by Kaz Bexola in the final. But I pulled a guy called Greg Bednard. It's a lovely dude. Yeah. American lad. Great guy. Solid pull. He was knocking around him and Fritz Corey with the US guys in my class, and both. Yeah. If you've never met Fritz, great bloke as well. Real acid arm wrestlers, you know. And Greg and Fritz, hats off to you lads. Had a really good time over there in Virginia Beach. I was just a puppy, hungry as hell. But, it was good times. And Greg, after, we were just chilling out, and he said, I won the Over the Top tournament, I believe, or one of the classes at the Over the Top tournament, which I had no, and I was like, whoa. I remember it blew my head off at the time. I was like, whoa. You know.
Yeah, he went the lightweight truckers is what he won. Lightweight truckers.
Yeah. I mean, just awesome, the stories that come out of that. But what kind of info have you got on who was involved in it, mate?
So I can tell you I have a decent example list for the 195 class. The 195 class was won by Johnny Walker. They had to wake him up at 6 a.m. to do his final match. He walked up to the table, pinned the guy like nothing, and then went back to sleep. But so some of the guys who were in that 195 class, I'll just go through some names. You'll probably recognize many of them. John Buonanato, Jack Wynn, Clay Rosenkrantz, Todd Damasio, Larry Fontaine, Gary Ray, Ray Darling, George Gibbons, Ron Bath, Tony Sanger from Canada.
Another beast.
And apparently there was German, Italian, Brazilian, and Mexican national champs as well. So that's just an idea of, that's just one class. Yeah. In the super heavyweight class.
Do you know who was the guy that made the final with Johnny?
It was actually Guy Lasorsa.
Was it really? Okay.
Yeah. Who was probably in the best shape of his life. I've seen pictures of him at that time. He looked impressive. And that class I think had 83 competitors.
Wow.
The supers, Cleve, Dean, and Scott, but there was also Mike Shattuck. There were
very strong one.
And the thing is, everyone was peaking for this event. Scott Norton was working out full time in the 6 months leading up to this contest. Like, this was the sole focus for many of the players going to this tournament. They wanted to win the big show. So you had a lot of very motivated people. The 238 class, so it went from 195, then 238, and then supers. 238 I don't know where they got that number from, but anyway, 238 was won by a guy from Oregon called Travis Baldwin. And he was known on the West Coast of the U.S., but he had never really won any other major events. But there, he finished number one in a class that included Gary Goodrich, Rick Vardell,
Jesus Christ.
And then I know he died, relatively young. I don't know how soon after the Over the Top, but, obviously he was a very, very strong guy that we know very little about. But in the lower classes, Dave Patton won his class, Alan Fisher won his class, but I don't have the details of exactly who was in those classes.
Unbelievable. So, I mean, obviously you can, in the film, Alan's got that little clip there of him being Alan. Very much. You don't really see Dave, I don't think. Actually, yeah, you do. You get a glimpse of Dave, don't you? But you'd see there's a great clip of George Gibbons in the flexing.
Oh, yeah.
You get a glimpse of Gabe Accardi in there.
Oh, Gabe Accardi, what a pull it up.
A lot of people don't remember Gabe because he probably walked around every day of his life at 138 pounds. He probably still is, and just a freight train strong.
Mega arm wrestler.
I assume he was in Dave Patton's class, and Dave
Gabe got fourth place in Dave Patton's class.
Who got second and third? You have
second place was Gary Stain.
Okay.
Yeah, and third place was Canada's Paul Cicchini.
Gotcha.
Oh my God, one of the brothers, yeah. My God, yeah.
In the middle, in Alan's class, the second place was Tony Golding, and he's another Canadian puller from out west. And I don't know much about him, so he must not have been active very long.
Say his name again?
Tony Golding.
Okay, yeah, I don't know.
And that's pretty much the results I have. So, but basically, if you were an active top puller in those days, you were there. So
where did Gary Goodrich finish?
Not in the top four. So I think he lost to Travis Baldwin, and I think he lost to Rick Vardell. I think those are the people he lost to. But so somewhere down the line, but I really don't know.
Great hearing the names again.
Wow.
My God.
I mean, John, we talk about John. John was 22 at Over the Top. Gary was only 20. So he was a young, 20 years old. You're young.
Yeah, absolutely. Just finding his feet in it, really. So that would put Alan Fisher at what, like mid-70s?
Yeah.
Alan Fisher.
And then the Canadian women did very well at Over the Top. Christine Jaworski won the lightweight class. She was a very top, the lightweights in Canada. She was the person in the 80s. And in the supers, Dot Jones' only losses ever were to Leanne Dufresne, who won the whole. Dot Jones had a perfect record between 83 and 96. The only losses that Dot had were against Leanne at that tournament.
Leanne. I love Leanne.
Yeah.
I absolutely love Leanne. She was absolutely ace. Character, amazing. I mean, the fact that she did what she did in the Dead Risk Press, she was like a female Jerry Caderet.
Yeah.
Love her.
And I think she was only 19 at that time as well. So.
Wow.
Mate, Leanne was such a lovely girl. What a fantastic character. Reminded me a great deal in terms of sort of just her outgoing, endearing character of Gabby. That's on Telos.
Right.
Had that same kind of just warmth about her, just and yet incredibly powerful girl. Just absolutely iron. Whatever happened to her. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So Leanne Dufresne is from years of arm wrestling. She had she can no longer pull, like she has had bicep issues. I think something maybe similar to Dave Patton. She still she was inducted into the Canadian Arm Wrestling Hall of Fame several years ago. So we do see her from time to time.
Oh yeah, pass on my best when you do see her because she's great. Love her. Yeah. Absolutely. Grew up watching that girl. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Her and Nancy Locke a little later. But yeah, fascinating stuff there, mate. I mean, do we know anything about any of the really big battles? Because you can imagine that it was like the Wild West in those classes. There must have been some real stories, you know.
Unfortunately, that information I don't have much, aside from these results I've shared. I don't know much about the battles, and unfortunately, very little was, I don't know if very little was filmed, but I haven't seen very much from this event. I saw the final with Cleve Dean and Scott Norton. Have you seen that match?
Yes.
Scott Norton. He hit hard. Now, there's stories that Cleve was feeling, a little under the weather that weekend, but the way he beat Cleve in the final was something else. Like, he hit hard.
He reminded me a great deal of a similar style to Lucas in terms of that just destructive, just blasted straight side and just raw as hell. And clearly, I mean, you only need to look at Scott there. You did an interview with Scott, didn't you? A lot of research with Scott for the...
Yes.
How was he as a... I mean, I want to get him on the show, but how is Scott as a guy? I mean, in terms of what...
He's
great love of arm wrestling.
Oh yeah, he tells me he made his living in professional wrestling, but he is first and foremost an arm wrestler at heart. Like, the arm wrestling is the first sport he fell in love with, and has been his lifelong passion. Wrestling was his job. Arm wrestling was his passion. So he loved it. Like, he really loved to arm wrestle.
What forced him out of the sport, Eric?
I think it was just money. He needed money, and he got an offer to go wrestle in Japan, and that's pretty much it. Interestingly enough, that was the last tournament, as far as I'm aware. Well, I know it was the last for Scott, and that's right when Cleve took a 7-year break from the sport.
Yeah.
So those two guys out of the sport in '86, perfect path for John Brzenk to emerge as the guy, and John just kept getting stronger and older and bigger. 87, 88, 89, that was John Brzenk, basically saying, I'm the man now.
Yeah, apart from Lucas. Richard was still a dominant football because Lucas was so fleetingly in and out. Again, I learned that when I spoke to Richard.
Yeah.
When he was fleetingly in and out, but his record against most of the top arm wrestlers is a positive one. He's got a positive record against John, got a positive record against Goodrich, got a positive... When I found all this out, I was like, holy, wow. I mean, and he was clearly nowhere near as dedicated, which is remarkable. But obviously a bigger man, much bigger man.
John competed, in so many more events. He was on TV so much more. And Richard we'd only see a couple of times a year. But you're right. They were neck and neck through those years. They'd go back and forth, 88, 89, 90.
Yeah, I would say Richard wasn't as dedicated. It's just that Richard is a gym rat. I mean, I'll bet Richard worked out 100 times as often as John.
Yeah, but like you say, he was not, I'm talking about arm wrestling. I mean, John, one of the most fascinating facts ever about Richard is the fact that he never trained for arm wrestling.
Correct.
He didn't, I mean, that is an unbelievable, when he told me that, I was shocked. Right. Because you wonder if he'd had technical tuition, instruction, someone to sort of show him those nuances, how good was that? Could he have been at his peak? I mean, my God, he was showing up and like you say, he's a gym rat. Just a super strong, he's Larry Wheels, for Christ's sake. He's the guy that's just strong as balls in the gym, but shows up, gets him on an arm wrestling table and just basically drives your ass sideways. But he could do it with everyone.
Right. I mean, you're exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, that messes with my mind. I can't really get my head around that.
Right.
Because I've seen him over years compete. I mean, I saw him in Sweden. My first time that I saw Rich live, apart from Over the Top, when I was a puppy and I didn't really know who I was looking at, was in Sweden, when he came over and dominated in the WAF. And he had this aura about him where he was almost like intimidating. At the table, he was so blisteringly fast and genuinely intimidating. He ripped the table out of the ground and wow. But when you spoke to him, he was Rich Lucas, the most humble,
humble guy,
lovely guy ever. Talk about Jekyll and Hyde, Yeah. But I got a shot with him in Sweden, and when you gripped his hand, my God.
Right.
I mean, just a genuine monster.
the difference between a guy like Richard and a guy like Larry Wheels is Larry Wheels is singularly a gym rat. Richard Lupke's is a gym rat who grew up working on the farm, which is what probably developed his hands. Because the thing that makes Richard, well, not the thing, but one of the big things that makes Richard Richard is his hands are so strong. His right hand is ridiculously strong, and it's probably from growing up on a farm more than it is working out in the gym.
And the other thing that separates him greatly from Larry is his sheer stats. Physicality of Richard, length of arm, size of hand. He's just a very, very big man. Yeah. Which Larry is not. He's a guy with enormous amount of power and muscularity on him, but he's not a big man.
And that guy, 100 pounds lighter than him, still found ways to beat him.
Yeah. If we go back to Over the Top, so Over the Top, there was a lot of hope, right, associated with that film. They're like, this movie's going to change everything. Over the Top's going to come out. Armwrestling's going to go mainstream. Movie sort of flopped, didn't do very well, and Armwrestling didn't go mainstream. In fact, if you look at the results for some of the tournaments for those years, 88, 89, there weren't that many huge tournaments. WPA Worlds were going down. They weren't like in that heyday. Even the Petaluma, because it was no longer on TV, that was going down a bit. One event that kept doing very well, despite not having television coverage, was an event called the North American Championships, which were held in Amos, Quebec. Now, Amos, Quebec is a small town of 5,000 or 10,000 people in northern Quebec. It's in the middle of nowhere. Even for me, I live on the border of Quebec. I would have to drive at least 8 hours to get there. You can't fly into it. But the cash prizes they would give were enough to attract a lot of the top guys from the U.S. So people like, I'm just going to run down some of the names of the people who competed in those events in the late 80s. Paul Cicchini, Dave Hicks, Dave Patton, Ray Taglione, Serge Rizero, Cobra Rhodes, John Brzenk, Gary Goodrich, George Gibbons, Garvin Lewis, Gabe Accardi, Denis Zebroy, Steve Morneau. That's just to give you a sense of how stacked these tournaments were.
Oh, that's ridiculous. It's like a who's who of North American arm wrestling in that era. Just ridiculous.
Now, some of that footage actually does exist on Arm Sport Videos. Scott McInnes has some of it, and it's crazy matches. Cobra Rhodes, he said this was his favorite event because there were so many wars at that tournament. And some of these guys were local guys. A guy by the name of Christian Goyette, who actually beat Cobra on a few occasions. And he was just a local guy. And this is sort of like in Cobra was getting to his peak there. So it was tough tournament.
Who the heck, where'd that guy go?
He never traveled. He never traveled. He just competed at that event every year.
I love
it. And, but Dave Patton started going in 82 and he went 10 years in a row and he won every single year. So he won 10 years at that event and then he won also 10 years in a row at Petaluma. It's absolutely unbelievable.
That is truly remarkable.
We lost Bob there.
Oh, as he dropped out, I'm sure he'll be back in 1 second. I'll try and join him back in if not. But, yeah, absolutely remarkable. I mean, people talk about the best of all time and it's thrown around and this, that and the other. But let's be honest, he is a true phenom of the sport. When you look at the guy physically, he was phenomenal to look at, just his physicality, ridiculous. He was the original sort of RVJ build, wasn't he, with the massive muscular arms, no legs, and also the length of his arms. I mean, he could tie his shoelaces stood up. He was ridiculous. Yeah. And unbelievably competitive. I mean, it's the old thing, you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. If you ever pulled Dave, he would load back with his hand over the moon. The man would, he wasn't giving anything, bless him. He wasn't giving anything. And you got to respect that's what's made him a champion. He didn't have a backward step in him at all. And his results in some of the toughest tournaments that have ever been. And you can only pull the guys in front of you. I mean, the Yukon Jacks another, massive tournament, and he was dominant.
Yeah.
An absolute slayer.
At this event, from 87 to 92, he won his class. Dave won his class every year. John Brzenk won his own class every year. Gary Goodridge won his own class every year. They would go every year to win the money. But what happened is the caliber was so strong with those guys there that attendance started going down because people were like, listen, we're not going to beat these guys. So eventually that sort of did in the event eventually. Sponsors weren't as interested, and so it ended in 92. But in those years, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, wow, some rock and roll arm wrestling up there. And the atmosphere was crazy because it was in an arena, 2,000 people screaming and yelling into the early hours of the night. So a lot of people just loved it for the atmosphere. It's sort of like Petaluma in the 60s, where people were really screaming.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about the fact that Over the Top didn't do particularly well. And it's an interesting one to get a measure on that, isn't it? Because Over the Top is still iconic now.
Yeah.
From
on Netflix. Well, if you go and put on Netflix right now, you will get recommendations on Over the Top. Now, sure, if you're in the arm wrestling fraternity, it's cult following, isn't it? Right. But it's still one that you speak to people. It's one of the films that everybody's seen. Oh, I like that film with the trucker guy, and everybody refers to it. And so many guys got into the sport of arm wrestling as a result of that. And I made a comment the other day about when WAL makes the wind, then other promoters get your sales up.
Yeah.
Live off the back of that, let that empower you, let it drive your promotion forward. Over the Top's been doing that for 20 plus years.
It's a movie that actually, it didn't do so well in the theater, but it had a really long life on TV in reruns, and a lot of people have seen it. They didn't see it in 87, but they saw it by chance on TV one day. So a lot of people are aware of the film. You're right.
It's done probably more for arm wrestling, I would say, than any single entity since.
Over the longevity since 1987 till today, of course, yeah, absolutely. Because you're right, people still refer back to that movie. Newcomers, they don't refer back to the start of the WAL or the UAL or the AAA or the WAF. But newcomers who had no idea about the sport will now look at that movie and refer back to it.
But it's another point that I made when we're talking about, the perfect storm that is John. If you look at Over the Top and all of the unbelievable names that were in there, of the guys that were the top man then, only one has lived to the present and is still spoken of in that same, the others have come and they're legends in their own right, and they get talked about and everybody refers to them, and rightly so. But only up to very recently, and only then because he wanted to stop really, did John walk away from the crown. Because, last year prior COVID, he was coming back and he was going to be in the top 8. And we knew that if he showed up ready, he could have been the man that won that again. That in itself underlines the greatness of the GOAT, doesn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
What else do you need? He competed there, slaying dragons. And he was still slaying them up to 2019,
Yeah. Another thing, so Over the Top, yes, that was one of the definitely events that propelled the sport forward and increased exposure. Another event that happened a couple of years later that really expanded, I'd say, the caliber of the sport was the story of how the sport was introduced to the Soviets. In 88, there was the AAA, American Armwrestling Association, had a team physician who was also the team physician for the American Powerlifting Association. And he had attended an event in Moscow. It was the first ever powerlifting meet between the U.S. and the USSR. And he saw this and he said, this is absolutely great. And then he talked to the organizer of the whole thing and he says, you should do this for arm wrestling. And he's like, arm wrestling? What's that? That's not a sport. And then he says, no, this is an organized sport. And he talks about the WAF. And then the guy got interested and then he said, yeah, you know what? Let's do this. So in 89, they worked with the American Arm Wrestling Association to form a team, a U.S. team, to travel to the Soviets to introduce the sport, but also to have a competition, a friendly competition. And then, that's a huge opportunity. So the team captains for the U.S. were Ray Darling and Ray Taglione from Florida. And it was an expensive trip, so not everyone could afford to go, but it was an experience of a lifetime. But they had they arranged a team of about 12 people. Canada was involved, but there's only one person who represented Team Canada. It's a gentleman by the name of Mike Katter, and he was back-to-back WAF world champion at 220 pounds in the late 80s. So he was a strong guy. They go to the USSR. So the USSR, to prepare for this, they don't know what arm wrestling is. What the WAF supplied them with was a video of the 1987 Worlds in England. That was professionally filmed. Here's a video. Get ready. I think they sent the specs for a table, and I think they actually sent over a table so that they could build tables in the meantime, so that when they get there, they'll be ready.
Wow.
And they decided, okay, we don't have any arm wrestlers, but we're going to find some strong guys. So they go into they look who is on the Olympic team in weightlifting, who are the best wrestlers, and they're all invited to this competition.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the
absolute class.
So the Americans, they start off the first day. I think they did like a little demonstration. This is what arm wrestling is. These are some of the techniques. So the competition was done over 3 nights. It wasn't a standard double elimination tournament. They didn't have very many people. So what they did was they would take an American or a North American and put them up against a Russian, and it would be like a 2 out of 3 super match. So the first day, the Russians sort of said, okay, we think we'll put the strongest guys against the strongest Americans and the weaker guys against what they thought were the weaker Americans. Mm-hmm. The North Americans won every single match.
Yeah, sure.
Surprisingly. But some of these guys, there was the gold medalist from the 1980 Olympics in the super heavyweight weightlifting was one of the competitors. And Ray Darling flashed him. The guy was probably 300 pounds. Ray Darling beat him like he wasn't even there.
Yeah. The
second night, they said, okay, we're going to change the roster. So then they took their strongest guys and put them against the weakest Americans because they wanted to get on the scoreboard. And they actually won the first 3 rounds, the first 3 guys. But after that, it was a joke because the third night they realized, okay, we're outclassed, and it was more of a friendly day.
Yeah.
But, imagine you're a Russian and you're there on the first day and you're the heavyweight world Olympic lifting champion and you see Ray Darling. Now, people need to understand Ray Darling, God rest his soul, is probably 6 foot tall, probably 180 pounds, and looks like a string bean. I mean, he just looks
a librarian,
right?
Yeah.
And that guy, and so this heavyweight is like, are you kidding me? I'm gonna crush this little guy. And then the second he grabbed Ray's hand, he goes, "Oh shit." The Russians were, it was a very friendly, the whole week was very friendly, and they were so impressed. The person they were the most impressed with was Ray Taglione. Ray Taglione was 135 pounds. I know Ray. I've arm wrestled Ray many times.
Yeah, I know Ray very well also.
Yeah.
But, so that was the first initiation to the Eastern Bloc. And from there, that led to the creation of arm wrestling federations in all the former Soviet states, Ukraine. And what they did to get started was they had the footage of that event. So they had the 1989 challenge, and that's what they studied. And they had some information shared by the Americans, but that's how they started their programs. And so it all traces back to that inaugural event. Had that never happened, it would have happened eventually. Yeah. But that's really when the Russians got into the sport. Yeah. By 91 was the first year that someone from the former Soviet Union won a WAF world title, Eric Roussin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He won in 91.
Yep. And Erekler was another guy that competed for a very long period of time. I mean, he was still rolling in the sport in 2003, the year that Travis Bagent won in Ottawa.
Yeah.
You know, and enjoyed massive success throughout that period of time, going through the weight classes. You know, starting in that 198 region and then working his way up, but always a beast, rock strong.
Yeah.
Rock strong individual.
And then by the and then that's 90s also the first year they had the Golden Bear tournament in Moscow. And in those first few years, John Brzenk, if you've seen the famous match between John Brzenk and the Georgian giant Zauer from 1990, that's a fun match to watch. If you haven't seen that, that's a really classic match. But the point is,
go ahead.
Yeah, that's the one where basically he kept dropping his wrist. You know, John would try to take his hand and he let his wrist go back and eventually just
stop. Right. That's not from 1990. That's 1994.
No, 1990, the first one, the very first one.
Oh, okay. Well, then the Georgia Giant didn't learn anything because that exact same match happened again in 1994 because that's the year I was there. And so now that I know this about 1990, it means he's had 4 years to think about what to do with John Brzenk and still couldn't figure out what to do with John Brzenk.
If it makes him feel any better, I had more time than that, and I never figured out what to do with that. But
Zauer did get a win on John, I think in 92, I think. He got a single win at some point.
He did, and it might have been in 94.
Okay,
I vaguely remember losing one time, and John would take his hand, and then he'd just flop wrist, and he had a hard time finishing him.
Yeah.
And then I think you're right. I think he lost one match, and then John decided, I'm just going to grip him low, dead around the wrist, and pull him into a hook.
Okay.
And so I'm assuming John lost the very first match because I think John had to beat him twice. So then John just dumped him, and then they literally took a half-hour break, and you can see the Georgia Giant and his coach over there in the corner discussing what the frick to do because they're grabbing his hands. And you can just tell they're talking about, I don't know what to do now. I don't know what to do. And sure enough, it happened again, you know. And, so I'm going to add a little tidbit in there. So that year, I was there, and the Zoloffs, the Crushing Russian,
right?
Yeah,
Kazbak and Mirabak, they were brothers. And after the tournament's over, Kazbak comes up to me and he's asking, you know, for training advice, like what type of exercises do you do? How do I get my hand and wrist stronger and things like that? So I'm showing him and Mirabak a couple wrist curl exercises at the time that I did. And if you think about it, Hazimir Zoloff at that time was probably 5 years old back in 1994. I mean, I don't know how old he is, but I mean, he must have been a little kid. So now you have Hazimir being raised by a father and an uncle who have pretty dedicated their lives to arm wrestling, instilled that amongst their son, you know, Haji, and we all know what happened there. Yeah. He became, in my opinion, the strongest pound-for-pound arm wrestler that's ever lived.
Yeah, Hazimurat's lineage in the sport is ridiculous.
Yes, it's
you know,
great.
Like you say, Mirabak is dead, Kazbak is uncle, all rock strong. His brother obviously was a beast as well. He's got a lineage, no doubt about it, mate. No doubt about it. And obviously he sits at the top of that, stronger than any and all. But again, it's that evolution of the sport that you can see that represents, and the evolution of the sport in his country. You know, now he's born into an entirely different time, as you said, the Crushing Russian, as he was called, and then he was exactly that. He got to a stage he was rock strong, absolutely ridiculous, dominant for many years. What an hombre, what a torchbearer, you know.
Yeah, and Kevin Bongard, Crushing Russian, I believe, pulled 2 weight classes. He pulled against Dave Hicks in the lighter class and Kevin Bongard in the heavier class. And ultimately, when it all shook out, I'm pretty sure Dave Hicks beat him to win his class over the Crushing Russian, but Bongard lost to him. And Bongard and him had wars It was after the wars that he had to go back against Dave, and then Dave beat him.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he would have beat him or not, if he wasn't tired, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, he was a monster.
Yeah. Yeah, solid.
Yeah,
solid.
I think the Russians, I just honestly think, especially back then, the Russians took getting strong and diagnosed the sport way more than the Americans did. Americans were focused more on technique, and Russians were focused more on strength, which I still think is today. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but technically, I still don't think Kazimir Zolov is a very good technical arm wrestler. But pound for pound, in my opinion, he's the strongest arm wrestler that's ever lived.
I don't know whether I agree with that, Robert Brown.
That's okay.
My pilot European gene there just nearly popping out of my... Yeah, he's not bad. Haji's pretty friggin'... He's not bad. He can do it. Trust me. He can pull. But I broadly agree in terms of the dissection of strength. I agree with that entirely. You know, I think the Russian, culturally, the Eastern European approach is more professional.
Yes.
You know,
unfortunately, the truth in the United States, and I assume Canada, I really don't know, is our culture is financially based.
Yeah.
We're financially based, and right or wrong, you know, it's expensive to go to tournaments and take time off of work. It's expensive to even train 3 hours a day, because who has that time to train like you should? And Russians, for whatever reason, or however they do it, they find the time. Maybe they're being subsidized. I don't know, you know. But then you find someone who does do that, like Todd Hutchins today. He finds the time to train in the manner that is needed, and you see what happens.
Yeah.
You know. So we've digressed a little bit. I apologize, but you know, yeah. I mean, it's really just a culture shift, I believe, is why the Russians got so strong so quick. You know, people will say drugs and crap like that, and maybe that's partly involved, but I guarantee you it was their culture and their mindset that got them to be so good so fast.
Yeah, I would agree, mate. And it's very interesting being able to trace those steps back.
Yes.
You know, Eric outlining that, and the fact that those guys were there and they got their first, this is how they sort of got their first glint of what was possible and the sport generally. And then, you know, from that, you see these little gems emerge.
Yeah.
You follow the path, and
I
give you Haji Zolov.
Yeah. So I always tell people, which is complete bullshit. I'll precursor it by saying, yes, I know this is complete bullcrap, but if not for me showing the Crushing Russian and Mirabang,
I was just going to follow you for that a minute ago.
Do a wrist curl, then maybe Haji never emerges.
Hey.
I know
that and the Cabinet rode in on. If it wasn't for you showing the Crushing Russian and all that stuff, I would have been another world title holder, because the only person that beat me in Virginia Beach was that song. So, yeah, you, Bob.
But I do think 94 was a particularly big year for the Russians, because when Kevin Bongard came over and Dave Hicks came over, they knew who they were.
Mm.
They knew Dave Hicks was a monster. They knew Kevin Bongard was a monster. Of course, everyone knew John Brzenk, Bill Brzenk was there, I was there. And when they did as well as they did, speaking specifically of the Crushing Russian, Kazbak, Zolov, when he beat Kevin Bongard and beat, I believe at least once, Dave Hicks, I think that set in motion the thought process of that whole family thinking, I can legitimately be the best in the world. Now, I also believe that Kazbak probably got some financial benefit from the government back then because of winning those matches, which then maybe they got so serious about it because they saw a better lifestyle for themselves. And they said, hey, let's dedicate our whole freaking lives to this, and Haji emerges. Because Haji was way stronger than his dad or his uncle. Once the Haji today would destroy his dad or his uncle of 1994 and 1995.
I think it's fair to put a separation between, his dad and his uncle as well.
Oh yeah,
Mirbek was strong,
uncle was much better.
but Kazbak was absolutely different planet.
Yes,
and it would have, Kazbak at his best was a bad man.
Oh yeah,
he's a very, very, very strong individual.
Yes, absolutely.
94. It's interesting you say 94, Bob, because that's also 93 was the last year that the majority of classes at the WAF Worlds were won by North Americans. 94 was the first year that the Eastern Europeans won majority of the classes, and they never stopped.
I think that's what gave them the belief. I know, how we all go to a tournament and we lose and it fires us up to arm wrestle harder? For some people, like myself, and I'm sure Russians, when I go and win a tournament, that fires me more up than when I lose. Like when I win, I don't want you to ever catch me again. And I have no doubt the Russians are the same way. All right, we finally beaten these damn Americans. Let's never let them touch us again. I really believe in that mindset.
Also, I think there's something in the approach.
I'm listening.
And the manner in which the Russians, the training and the grind is exactly that. It is the grind. And the surroundings that some of the Russians and the Eastern European athletes are in, the fact that they've got nowhere near, they're poorer people in many ways. They've got less facilities, and as you wind the clock further and further back, had fewer facilities, fewer luxuries in life, allowed them, in my opinion, to embrace that grind better. I never forget, I went over, and I was picked up at the airport once by Rustam Babayev, when he was a younger version of himself, but Rustam was coming up in the sport, just finding his feet, already a baby killer, but picked me up in a tiny little car with his little religious symbols on the, and I remember he was very humble surroundings, and yet such a, friendly, open person, but you could see that hardship in him allowed that absolute grit, that gravel that allows you to dig into things. And I think a lot of the Eastern European lads have got that. And it's a benefit. It is massively beneficial. It's like the old thing with, you talk about the places where life is tougher, producing better fighters, Mexican fighters as an example, because of that. It's just a better environment. If you're trying to breed a tough human being, the surroundings dictate that. And definitely Eastern Europeans have got that edge, that bite. Fair play to them, But I think I said it earlier, in the approach, just to round up this particular episode, fellas, the approach in Eastern Europe is professional. And in North America, American football's professional.
Right.
Arm wrestling's arm wrestling.
Right, because of the almighty dollar.
And we're still, you're still working on that. In the UK, exactly the same situation. Soccer's professional, arm wrestling's not professional. We've still got that's a transition to be made there. But it sets up some interesting conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are rapidly approaching the hour mark. Great episode. Hope you enjoyed it out there, guys. And we're not done yet. We're going to be back for another one in just a moment. And I'm sure we'll cover off maybe even a little bit more about Over the Top if there's things we missed there, because we seem to jump in and out of that a little bit today. But, ladies and gents, I want to say a massive thanks to Bobby Brown and the Mother Fluffing House. And Eric Roussin again, armwrestlingarchive.com. Ladies and gentlemen, get your ass over and check it out. He's never stopped. Been doing lists up to very recently about the best arm wrestler chronologically, year by year. The most recent thing put out there by Eric. Get over there, check it out, the armwrestlingarchive.com. Eric Roussin is the man, and he's putting together the history of the sport of arm wrestling. We're going to be checking out more of it in our next episode. Remember, this is your first visit to Supernatural Strength. Please like, share, subscribe, and until we see you next time on Arm Wrestling Old School, take it easy, peeps.
What grabs your eyes on that, if anything?